Wow, we made it to Exotic Car Hacks. Let's check out my boy PJ.
What's going on?
There he is. What's up, brother?
What's going on, buddy?
Good, man.
Good to see you too.
Finally made it to Exotic Car Hacks.
I'm glad you made it.
Can't wait to see this place.
I know, pretty cool, right? We built kind of a big, like,
it's like
hangout.
A giant man cave with much cooler cars.
Exactly, full bar, you know, like really nice art, cool shit. Not the type of art you sell, but cool
but you've
stuff.
Got the Whizbee, you've got,
I got giant transformers, you know,
I see the Basquiat bear bricks.
Exactly, and then, you know, cars, of course, the focal point of everything we do here. 1965 Cobra, Resto Mod by Backdraft, and then you continue here to the 90s collection, the stuff that was cool back in the day, you know, along with some of the most rare motorcycles.
Which car has the most horses in here?
The most power? Some of the ones at the bottom, because you have the Bugatti there, and then you have everything from the Senna to the 918, the SVJ. These are like the big dogs. So everything down here gets driven, of course. Everything up here is more for like collectability. But I drive the shit out of everything down here, so there's a lot of cars.
Solid lineup of 3 white cars.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cars missing actually, because I got another 7 cars at the house. I got 4 cars that are out at shops getting stuff done. So this place is usually a lot more packed than this, but today you're still seeing some of the bigger. I mean,
it's a solid lineup.
As it is.
If you had to choose, which is your favorite of these 3 to drive?
The 918 is definitely the better, most exciting hypercar. But the Chiron in itself, like that car, like the big dick thing, is just like
there's
untouchable.
No energy that touches
just, yeah, exactly. Like when you show up somewhere, no matter like it's the race model, it's this, like it just wins.
You could even be in a more expensive 918 than a Bugatti, like some
and
rare
it still
thing,
wouldn't, yeah,
and it still won't have the same wow factor as a Bugatti.
It's just a very unique, like it's almost like the perception of Lamborghini to poor people, right? Like automatically, it's like, hey,
above
like your
Lamborghini,
Lamborghini,
where they can even
right?
comprehend.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to be here. Usually, I don't record episodes of the Artlife podcast in other people's studio, but you come so self-contained.
Yeah, why not?
I couldn't resist. You know, the economy's down in the art market. I got to save where I can.
Well, welcome, bud.
Well, it's good to be here. You know, we just walked through some of the cars. We've known each other for a while. It's funny, when I first met you and we did a deal on an AP watch, I think the first thing I said after watching your program, which is, what's it called? It's not Exotic Car.
Watch Trading Academy.
Watch Trading Academy. So I basically feel like I was following that for a lot of my life before you formalized it.
Right, exactly.
But like I remember my father, when I graduated, gave me a little Rolex, one of those like basic entry level Rolexes. And about 6 months later, I went back to him and said, "Dad, would you be offended if I sold this and traded it for something else?" And in his mind, he didn't have any clue what I was talking about. He was like, "You don't like my gift to you?" And I said, "No, it's not that. It's just there's this other one I could get."
The one you really wanted, not the one he gave you.
And so I know exactly the first progression of watches. I started with that little rinky one, traded it for a two-tone sub. Then I traded the two-tone sub. When I say traded, I mean, you know, sell it for a profit and buy a better one, for another two-tone sub with a oyster and diamond bezel. And then from that, business started picking up, and the first real watch I got was a Royal Oak Audemars with a white dial, and I paid $19,000 for it back then.
Those days are long gone, huh?
Long gone. But I remember I had it delivered to my hotel room by a security guy. I mean, that's the problem. I've always bought gray market watches. You know?
Why is that a problem? It's okay.
No, there's no problem, I guess.
It's okay. Like, I mean, also back then, gray market was looked very like shady upon.
Yeah.
Today, I would say 90% of the market is gray market.
I guess
it's not like
I guess
it's a bad thing.
my regret would be not building those relationships with Patek and Audemars.
I don't think it's even necessary
when
anymore.
it was so affordable.
Yeah, but even during COVID, that changed so much that even if you had them, you weren't even on the list anymore. You know, because everybody else wanted them, and they were like, "Who's gonna get them?" So it's not like you missed out by not doing it. You know, like maybe now you pay a little bit more for whatever, but realistically, even now, even if you have those relationships, there's a lot of watches you're not getting just because so many people are on that line. And it's like if you compete at RM in Miami, you know, against all the money in Miami, right? I mean, we're not the richest people in Miami. There's like richer people in Miami, you know, and they're buying watches they're willing to lose all day long. You know, it's like, it's $2 million, I want this.
Yeah.
So the argument is, if you're just going to spend $2 million to lose 50 cents of that, right? Like when you resell, why not just pay an extra 100 and save the million? Like,
of course,
it's stupid. Like, and you can go through that stupidity of constantly recycling these relationships for nothing.
By the way, I think Richard Mille is in an interesting place. I was just there in Bal Harbour, and as you know, for years, if you walked into a Richard Mille dealership, they would say, oh, I don't have anything. I might have something for your wife, or I've got this one tourbillon for $7 million.
But they still don't have anything. Let me be clear.
I was just there.
Yeah, but what happens with people don't realize pre-COVID, 80% of the catalog of Rolex, 80% of the catalog of RM, actually more, I'd probably say 95% of that catalog, and 90% of the AP catalog is not worth the MSRP price.
No, of course not.
It never was.
No.
So the argument is...
You're beat before you walk out the door.
You don't want it anyways.
No.
And the argument is, even if now you're saying, well, now that stuff is back in stock, well, nobody wanted it anyways to begin with, right? So ideally what's happened is now the stuff that was in stock pre-COVID that nobody wanted is now in stock. So they still don't have the stuff that's worth more, in the store. So like the only difference is, like, you could walk in Rolex in 2018, and if you wanted a Daytona, you were like, I want this Daytona, and I tell you in a week I'll call you, I'll probably get it, and that just wasn't worth more than at that level.
Yeah, you're right.
So people still wanted that, and maybe that was a cool watch to get. But today, like, people don't remember that pre-COVID, Daytonas were also discounted when they were gold. Like, they were like, let me give you 10% off, buy today, 20% off, and so that changed dramatically, right? And now people are like, well, I want this Rolex Le Mans, but the argument is, even the Le Mans now, even if you have a good relationship and there's like 3 of those that are going to appear in the next like 6 months in like out of 100 stores.
They're
so
going to give them the best clients.
The guys that bought 50 of these ladies' watches and garbage that doesn't sell. So I've always said, the whole idea, I've been in the watch business since the year 2000, and the whole idea that people think that relationships are where the money's made are just completely misguided by the general understanding of just looking up for a number online on a rare watch and then saying the MSRP was only 40. Wow, I missed out. You know, like, but that's just not how the business works. So I'm not saying there isn't any value in having a relationship somewhere and saying you got that nice watch because you spent, but if you look at it from a business dollar standpoint, it has never made sense.
There's no need.
Never.
I will say, I've only bought one watch from the dealership out of the store. I was in Singapore in 2015, and I walked into Patek Philippe, and I knew nothing about the brand. I knew that it was typically like above. The highest, I knew it was above where I was at with my APs and Rolexes, but I looked at a 5712 rose gold Nautilus on a strap, and I was like, wow, that's a beautiful watch. They said 42,000. And I said, oh man, it's a little much. Could you do 37.5? I haggled with them in Patek Philippe and then bought it with my Amex. I'd just gotten my Centurion card. So I was with my brother. I said, man, I think I'm just gonna do it. And I threw it on the card. And so obviously those days are over, but what I was getting at is the one reason I would argue that everyone that loves watches the way we do should buy at least one that way in their life.
100%. It's an experience, right? It's an exciting experience.
They give you the Patek Philippe branded white glove and the scissor, and you cut the bag and you hear the air whoosh out. There's something to it.
But I'm telling you, like, that stuff doesn't happen anymore anyway. It doesn't matter even if you got to. They're like, here's your watch, get the fuck out.
I'm glad that I experienced it once,
The industries have changed dramatically. I keep saying this, and I get a lot of slack on Instagram. I'm like, Huracans are for poor people.
Yeah.
And people are like, you're such a, like, fuck. Why are you, like, telling people, like, Huracans are for poor people? And I'm like, the cost of money has changed. Driving a $200K car today means nothing.
I say that all the time.
Means nothing. Like right?
Or in perspective watches. You used to have that stainless AP or the gold Daytona.
And you were a big shot. You were a big shot. Like, this was the premium, right?
Yep.
But what people don't realize is that even the car industry, back then when you had a Lamborghini Diablo, you were somebody because there were only 100 Diablos.
Yeah.
You would never see a Diablo. And there was no 200K
it was
option.
Pre-production.
There was no 200K Gallardo option. It was like either you have the money or you don't.
Yeah.
But now you have an Urz, a Huracan, 16 variations of it,
the Roma,
150K cars, 200K cars, all entry point. You have a Porsche Boxster, like pretending you have a Porsche. So the poverty level of the integration of the brands from like, we need an entry point. We need to keep clients from an early stage to now. And people are like, well, are Huracans an expensive car? There's Range Rovers that cost 100K more than Huracans. And so, but no one is looking at the guy with the Range Rover going, that guy's my hero, you know, like that guy, unless you know money. So what's happened is the mentality of people has stayed in back in the day mentality, but they're now applying it to new car principles. And it unfortunately doesn't work that way. That's also why depreciation schedules are so much heavier today on cars than they were back then, because fine, but you also get better cars. Diablos were garbage. Like you drove them, they always broke down, you're always in the shop, so the stigma was, if you own an exotic, you're money pit, you know, it's never gonna be. I've had, you know, like I have like 39 cars now, and like one's in the shop every like 6 months for something very minor, and like, oh, there's a sensor here, boom, fixed, you know?
You don't have problems with McLaren?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because McLarens are terrible cars if you don't drive them.
Oh, you have to drive
them. So you have to think this way.
That's interesting.
All performance cars will break if they just sit. So that's why if you look at my car collection, all the heavy stuff is on the bottom. And people would say, well, the heavy stuff should be on top so nobody touches it. And I'm like, no, you have to drive it because it's going to get fucked up. Like I actually drive my Chiron because I'm like, if you don't drive it, you're going to get an $80,000 bill for like, well, it's leaking. And I tell people, I'm like, it's like a racehorse. You can't put it in a barn and then take it out once every 3 months and
expect it to race.
Well, expect it to even walk. It's like, I don't know what's going on. Like my muscles frozen. And then it's like, oh, it broke his leg. It's out of commission for a month. It's the same as a car. Like all this stuff has to be used. And people are like, well, you don't want a car that's been abused. I'm like, why not? Like, unless the body's hurt, like, you know, you crashed it or like it's got rock chips everywhere. But like, why don't I want someone who drove the car? Like, it doesn't mean the car's broken. You look at it, you go, it's been used. It's used correctly. Like it didn't get abused. You know, the guy knew how to drive. Okay, he drove fast. It's going 200 miles per hour. It's better if he keeps driving at 100 than 10 miles per hour around the city all the time, you know?
You know, so I've given a lot of advice on this podcast to people that are just getting into investing in art, collecting art. I wanted to ask you, for someone that is getting into, and I guess it's a two-part question, but someone that's just getting into investing in or owning a nice watch, and investing in or buying a nice car, what would your suggestions and by the way, I'm not telling you to not buy the course because he does have a proper way to do this, but in a very abridged version, what would your kind of key notes to someone getting into either of those worlds be?
So these are two completely different worlds.
Yeah.
Because of the utility. Like you can wear a watch a whole year, polish it, and then resell it, and nothing's happened. But there's so much that goes to a car. Mileage, condition, what if something's broken, you know, like how was it treated, was there a loan, you know, there's a lot of moving factors. So watches are fantastic tools for wealth preservation and more importantly, wealth creation. You can constantly flip them, make money, fast transaction, just like art, wire in, wire out. You know,
I would say watches are the most liquid thing there is.
Exactly, like the liquidity is very high, it's exciting, there's a large demand, large pool of buyers, so like, big industry.
If you buy the right watches.
But well, there's always a buyer. It's just not at the right price. But there's always in the watch world buyers of different ranges, and there's an industry behind it. So there's a huge amount of watch dealers, brokers, like traders. So it's not like you don't know where to get liquidity.
I use watches as a parameter when I'm talking to an art investor, and because I always say, I tell people art is a semi-liquid asset.
Yes, correct. It's less liquid than watches.
It's less liquid than watches and less liquid than cars. So I always say, if you want something you can show off and enjoy and get your money out immediately, buy a watch, do not buy a painting.
Right, exactly.
So I will agree with you that watches are probably the most liquid luxury asset you can enjoy.
So the reason people don't realize that is because you need a home, and it comes down to utility. You need a home and a car. So typically you're grown up to kind of understand those two asset classes by your parents. Oh, we own a home, it makes sense. You have to buy your cars, not lease them, or maybe you lease them because that's what in your head your parents told you was smart, which is retarded. But the point is that you basically look at that because that's what you're ingrained with. But your parents' time probably didn't look at a watch as an investment. You know, so like today it's a different ball game. So they're like, why would you spend on that luxury? You know,
you're burning all your money on watches.
Right, this is stupid. Like this is stupid. Whatever. It's just whatever. So it's an asset class comfort. But to answer your question, to go back to actually give you an answer, if you're going into the world of watches, you can be more towards, I really want this watch. Am I buying it at the right price? Maybe I took PJ's course, maybe I didn't, but I'm going to educate myself on the dollar and purchase something at a good price, right? Like that's easier to do. The world of cars is a little bit more problematic because you may need the lending to do it. You may need the insurance to do it. You may need the ability to make sure you don't have a whoops. Like sometimes I tell people, they're like, I really wanted a really low Ferrari, like Ferrari 458. And I'm like, where do you live? Well, I live in Michigan, maybe and there's a lot of snow. And I'm like, okay, so what else do you drive? Do you have a G-Wagon or something? No. Like I just want to drive my car every day.
My daily driver.
So there's a problem there, and you can't treat that as an asset class and use it the way you do on your Honda or your Maxima, even if the money makes sense. So you can't do that. So there's a lot in cars. So I usually tell people, start at a point where you get in and don't expect to make money, expect to break even or lose a little bit of money, just so you learn your comfort with the asset class. And then little by little, increase it. As you build a network of who's going to fix it. You can never want to go to the dealer. Who do I get to fix my interior if I scratch it by accident? If I need a bumper repainted, who's going to do that? Like, you don't get that experience from, I read in a magazine, this guy's the best guy. You get it by walking in the shop, talking to the guy, having a car, and being taken as a serious person. So you need to work your way into the game. So starting with an R8, good level car, already depreciated enough, easy in and out, before moving into a Ferrari, Lamborghini, something that's really low, crazy, it would attract too much attention. You don't know how to handle that. So that's that. The second piece for the watches, you can start with a lot of really good entry-level watches. You don't have to go to Patek or anything. You can go to Ulysse Nardin, Panerai, even Hublot. They're cheap enough watches to get in the door and basically wear something cool without spending like more than 10K, have it on your wrist, and it will resell for the same thing, or like just a little bit more or whatever. But as you kind of get comfortable with that, you can go into more investment-grade stuff like, I have multiple watches, so I'm going to buy an AP, and buy a Patek, buy a couple of RMs, this. And the more comfortable you are, the more money you spend, right? Like the more you're like, I don't mind because I know where the liquidity is. Right? Like that's how it works. First car I ever bought, I was petrified. I'm like, what if I get stuck in this Lamborghini? Nobody wants it, right? That's the thing that goes through your head. But today, when I see a car, I'm like, sold. The guy's like, you don't want to see anything? I'm like, you have a title? Nah, I bought a $2 million car yesterday over just like a text message. I was like, send it to me. I was at F1 and literally someone texted me, they're like, hey, you want another 918 Spider? You just sold yours. I'm like, yeah, what's the car? He sends me like literally one vague photo. And I'm like, how many miles? What's the car? He's like this. So while I'm in the back of a Maybach being driven home, I'm like, okay, done. And he's like, okay, so we're good. I'm like, yeah, why are you tomorrow? We're fine. And he's like, oh, you don't need to? I'm like, you're fine. Like, just send me your car.
That was one of the aha moments I had in art where before I had really grown my business, I had been focusing on artworks and prints that were $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And then I got lucky through just complete chance. I was able to get the access to sell a Keith Haring. I've told this story before, but I get the Keith Haring within a couple days, sell it to Kris Jenner, and she bought a $350,000 work over WhatsApp while she was sitting on the runway at Milan Fashion Week. Didn't ask for a contract, nothing, just what's your wire info. And then a day later, I had $350,000 or whatever in my bank. And I was like, wait, that was way easier
it always is.
than the guy that's interrogating me for a month over a $5,000 print.
It's always that way. And it's because when you're buying 300K art, when you're buying 200K watches, when you're buying a $1 million car, you have experience with the asset class. So you're like, hey, I looked you up. Your gallery's real. I know how to tell a real from a fake in 2 seconds. I know you have your reputation. You're not going to throw it away over selling me a fake. Or even if you sell me a fake and you take it back and say, hey, I fucked up, I'll take it back, here's your money. But you're not going to, like, I can do transaction with you and I already know what I want to buy. I know what it's worth to me. I'll pay it. Like, it's fine. Like, that's what it is. So that's what you deal with that cuts that time from I'm interested to I'm buying. Right? Like versus it's like, here, like just give me what I need. And you also your time's worth something. So you don't have time for a 15 question. You already Googled it, looked it up, you know what you need, and you're like, okay, like I'm ready to buy this. I don't care. So a lot of poor people who are getting into these asset classes, and when I say poor people, they're inexperienced financially, they're unable to basically make these decisions because they have no understanding of the asset class. So it's no different than you going to your stock broker friend and saying, hey, what are your stock tips? Right? And he's like, well, buy these 3 stocks. Well, how much do I need to put in? How much do I need to get out? What's the buy? What's this? Should I do this? Should I do it this way? Should I set that? Right? Versus the other guy who's an experienced stock trader, right? Like having a real conversation and understanding, like going to someone and saying, here's my top 3 picks. And, and just being like,
being straightforward.
Exactly. Because it's the comfort with the asset class. Always.
Our best clients, it's not easy because there's always headaches. Nothing's easy, no matter what you're doing. But dealing with someone that knows what they want, where a client comes and says, all right, I want an Andy Warhol endangered species orangutan, and I need to be at 185. I know I can spend time on that because A, I know he will, the moment I've got it, he'll wire me that money. And B, it's not a wild goose chase.
Because he did his homework.
We get a lot of clients that have just made their first money and they think,
right, and that's the new guy that's like,
the new guy
what should I buy?
Exactly.
And then they need you to convince them to buy.
Not just what should I buy, what you tell me what to buy. And then I tell them what is the best investment. And then they go the opposite direction, buy the thing I told them not to buy. And then 6 months later, come back
and the other thing that occurs through that is a lot of people think in their head that you're like, when you're really good at something and you've done it a long time, you as a salesman, as the person selling the good, also act faster. Because you're like, you want this, it's like 180. And you're like, I'm helping you, it's a good deal. Like, I'm gonna make money. I didn't get rich being an idiot and giving away everything free, but like, it's a good deal, right?
Yeah.
But they don't know how to recognize a good deal, and because they didn't fight for it, or they didn't tell you like, we're going from 300 down to like 160, they feel like you're doing one over their head. Like I could say like, I genuinely want to get rid of this car in my portfolio, I don't want it. Could be the best deal in the world at like 810. Like
and someone will still offer you 750.
Right, and then another guy comes in and be like, I would have paid 850, so like, write it up, like I want that car, like that's amazing. But again, it comes down to the comfort of the asset class.
It's something about
and
the
psyche. Feeling that you got to negotiate. So sometimes I know that when I post a good price and the first question is, what's the best price? I don't even respond to that text. Like I'm like, you're not a buyer for this item, so it's going to be a waste of 30 minutes answering questions while someone else hits me up and goes, yo, what's the wire instructions? I need to send a deposit now and take this. So very, very different when people have no experience with asset class and they think they got to get a steal, but they don't know how to recognize a steal. You could tell me, hey, this retina is like 30 grand, you got to buy it now, we give me 100. And I'd be like, what are you making? It's like,
exactly.
What do you care? Like, if you're gonna make 100, like, give it back to me. I'll buy back for 50 down the road. And it's like, I don't trust you. Like, I don't know you. I don't trust. So what happens is people become their own worst enemies because they're like, I'm asking you a question on advice for expertise, but I'm not listening to anything you're saying. I'm just gonna make up my own version of that expertise, and then nothing happens.
I always say that if I had to choose between a buyer or a seller, I will choose a seller that I can get a great artwork for a great price every time, because I know once I've got that, I'll find a buyer. I try to work backwards, and I always look at it like a win for me is finding someone that got a great deal on an art investment, has had it for 10 years, they're gonna double their money, whatever it is. I can do really well and still sell it to my client, and they're getting a great price.
Exactly, everyone's winning.
Everybody's happy. That
but those are the easiest ones. It's like the guys that bought real estate in 2008, and now they would take a double, right? Their house is worth 4 times. The next guy will pay 1 time over. Everybody makes some money. So, I mean, those are perfect case scenarios, but in many cases, even when the art is in demand, the car is in demand, the watch is in demand, people just don't know how to figure out numbers, so they feel like the number between the listed number and the selling number is the victory. They don't understand how to price something. So.
One question I had for you, because you've been doing the Watch Trading Academy a while now, and I saw you got multiple students that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars.
We have multiple $1 million students too now.
Even better.
Yeah, crazy, right?
It's crazy. It's been.
You remember at the beginning where, like, if someone was making 20 grand a year, I was like, this is great. I was like, this is fantastic.
No, I've watched the whole thing.
Now they're like 100K, 200K. Like, I have guys now in 6 months making 100K a year.
It's wild.
Like on a 12-month rolling, right? And I have other guys in less than 12 months that got to 250. And it used to take 3 years to get to that.
So my question was, do you feel like you've made it harder for yourself to find inventory for good prices because you're releasing so many of these competitors to the market?
No. And
or you just raised the threshold.
Yes.
You just went higher market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the key too, right? Like, I have to advance to keep teaching.
Yeah.
So I'm selling Panerais Hublots 15 years ago, right? Like 5 grand, 10 grand, whatever. People are buying that stuff. I'm making a 1K margin, whatever. I'm happy. But I look at that and I go, okay, I brought 250 people in this week, next week, 2 months. Like now I have like 10,000 competitors. Okay, we have like 26,000 people in Watch Trading Academy. So like, and let's say we have roughly about a 35% like success rate with the course, which is super high in the online courses today. So I'm really proud of that. But that means 35% of people have either made their money back or a profit within 6 months, which is a great metric. Great metrics, right? Yeah. How many courses can say that? They're like,
and it's different in my eyes because it's not like you're teaching them how to sell bed linens.
No, yeah,
you're teaching them how to buy a watch that they probably dreamed of owning their whole life.
Exactly. Anyways,
you know?
like I always say, people are going to buy Ferraris and Pateks anyways.
Yeah.
The question is, why not learn to buy it right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, by them coming in and selling Omega, Panerai, I went over to I got to sell Rolex and AP.
Yeah.
By them coming in and saying, hey, we're learning about your course, and for once we have money, I'm not attracting guys that are like, I'm broke.
Yeah.
I'm attracting guys that are like, yeah, I did want that Patek, so let me learn from this guy and see how I can get it. Well, now comes the millionaires in my course that are like, yeah, I just want to also learn that, not the guys that are like, I want side income.
No,
so those guys come in and they're like, I'm willing to drop in $200K from day one.
Yeah.
So at the time, they would have been my, like, technically they would have been richer than me coming in with $200K in inventory on day one, you know? And I don't have that. So I go, for me though, I'm coming into this and I'm saying, okay, so now that you're at AP, I got to move to Patek. Now that you're at Patek, I got to go to RM.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to do less retail business and more network business, right?
Yeah.
So like my shift has happened so much that I never have competitors. And it's not entirely true. Like I do have some competition, but my clients, just like your clients, probably don't want to wire a stranger $500K for a painting, or you know, like the authenticity, the reality, the
They'd
comfort.
rather wire it to me and have me deal
And
with
pay
it.
a little bit more even, or pay you a fee and say, just broker this for me, it's okay. Because the mind is like free. It's like I'm not like wiring and what's happening? Like, why is the guy not answering my call? So that's the same thing in our business. It's the same thing. And I've watched you grow, over the years, and I've been in the same boat. So we raised our standard to the point where entry people can sell stuff and not impact that stuff.
Exactly. I think it's fascinating what has happened in the entire luxury sector where
2020, man.
Even like for years, I've always felt like I was on the inside joke of something, like having a watch like this or a car and knowing I didn't pay what other people paid, and that it's just like a commodity. I think one thing about me is I've never gotten too possessive over any one thing. To me, it's all just stuff. Like if you took all the toys away and I was healthy and happy, I still would probably be all right. But I don't get, held up on anything because I realize.
But it's part of your business now.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for me. Like we look at it, a lot of people tell me all the time, they go, well, what's your favorite car?
Yeah.
And usually I say, well, every car creates a different experience driving it. It's something different. And they're like, but which one's your favorite? I'm like, well, I haven't had a favorite ever. Like they serve different purposes, but I don't really care. The favorite is
if
the
someone
one,
walks through the door and offers me the right margin, it's gone.
And like they're like, well, but you built that and it's your pride. I'm like, if you're in the industry, typically your emotional connection to this stuff is very different than the guy whose prized collection is like something they bought because they wanted it, right? So it's a very different dynamic, and I think for me, like. Just like you, I'm sure, like you look at your things as like assets and you're like, I paid X, it'll bring Y, maybe it'll go up to Z, and I'll sell it. And I look at it very, very similarly.
Do you have any watch that you've held for a long time, or any watch that you wouldn't sell?
No, I mean, the only watches I don't sell, there's some watches I bought that I genuinely wear all the time, and I don't care that they go down in value. Like, and there's watches I bought in 21, 22 that went down in value, but I enjoy wearing them, and I'm like, I could liquidate it, but I still wear it.
That's the other thing. Once it goes down, if you lose a certain amount,
once you lose the basis, you're like,
I'll just keep it.
There's no rush in selling it and freeing up the money, unless you don't have the money. So if you're already rich, you're like, well, I like that watch, and if I free up the $300K, what am I going to do with it? Like, I don't need that $300K to buy the next $300K.
So one thing that I wanted to touch on is, I believe prior to you starting Watch Trading Academy and Exotic Car Hats, you wrote a series of 3 books, I believe, right?
Not before, during, So I wrote 12 books total.
Wow.
I wrote, my first bestseller was in 2013.
Third Circle Theory,
That's
right?
2013, That was my 11th book.
What?
Yeah, so that was my 11th book, and I just released my 13th one in 2021 called Gated Choice.
So for some of our listeners that don't have time to read all 13 of those books, I know that
you need to read 3.
All right.
Third Circle Theory, Radius, Gated Choice.
And so what would you say are the defining lessons or teachings out of each of those books? So the 3 books,
the roadmap to human consciousness, broken down into 3 segments: awareness, self-awareness, consciousness. So self-awareness being the second book, consciousness being the third. The further you go, the less people the further books appeal to, because they're not in these stages, right? So it's a roadmap. So it's like if you're looking at the map from driving from here to Egypt, you may say, I'm really concerned about the US part because I know I'm going to take that part, but not so much about the rest of it until I get there. Then I'll see what the map looks like for Egypt, So the point is that that's how consciousness works. So it's a progressive state, just like money. You can't go like, I want to solve $1 billion business. I've never built a business. I'm going to go straight for the top. I have no money. I'll figure it out. That's not how that works. Your business is never going from 0 to $1 billion. It's going to 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 100, and so on and so forth, right? So that's the essence. So I tell people, read third circle theory. Once you know where you are, if you're advanced enough, read radius. If you're advanced enough, read gate of choice. But the argument is those 3 books are my legacy to what I consider to be the most important work I've put out there. And the main and most important aspect of my work was that I wanted to make sure I was super fucking rich before I did that. Because I didn't want these books to be tainted by the need for marketing in a way. That would be like, I need to advertise a Ferrari on the cover and be like, this is how you get rich. So I was like, I don't want to do that. So in order not to do that, I have to be in a position where I don't care if you read the book or not. And the first book was so popular, it was self-published, and it got so popular that people bought like 4 million copies of it. So it's out there, people are reading it, and a lot of people are progressing, but I knew that the progression would be 80% of people would read Third Circle, 10% of people would read, Radius.
10% of that.
Exactly.
And did you self-publish those?
Yes, because originally when we wrote Third Circle Theory, nobody wanted to publish me, so I was like, hey, you have to give up like 60% of the money, 70%, you're not famous. I was like, okay, well, it's fine, but I don't want to, and I had a platform called Secret Entourage to sell it, so we had like 100,000 students. I was like, why would I want to do that? I'll sell it to them first. And then Andy Frisella read the book and he put it on his top 2 best books of all time, and then a ton of people bought it. So it made the virality of the book. And then the next 2 books, I actually got publishing offers, and they were very fair. It was like 50 cents. And I was like, nah, because I still have the way to spread it. And I was like, what are you going to do for me? Put me on a book tour? I'm not going to go somewhere and sit there and fucking sign books. So I was like, I don't give a shit. I was like, it's not aligned to the way I want to do business. And I knew that nobody was buying shit on Barnes & Nobles anymore. It's not like the goal. Don't. So it was more of an ego play if I got it published. So I was like, I'll just keep doing what I've been doing because it's working.
But so out of that, because we're still I want to hear if you had to essentially condense or condense the first book, at least. Let's say that's the most accessible one, Third Circle Theory. If you had to condense, let's say 1 or 2 teachings for our listeners out of that book, or whatever your overall arching theme or goal for people reading that, what would it be?
So simply put, people need to realize they're born with a set of programs, and these programs are enslaved by their parents who lived in a different era in a different way. And often, too late do they switch back out of that programming to experience new programs and to understand what value system they want to adopt. So the first book is like a slap in the face reality check to making you question, why are you how you are? And if you can't answer that, then you think I'm an asshole because I pointed it out. If you realize it's making you think, it's going to force you down a path of discovery. That's what awareness is. Awareness is about understanding that your environment was given to you and you can shape a new one to fit in of your choosing. That's the first one. The second piece to this of the entire hierarchy of the books, not just the first book, that was about the first book, is that self-awareness, a lot of times, is melted into awareness. People are like, you're an aware person. They mean in their head, you're a self-aware person. But self-awareness is about identity. And identity is something that takes a long time to establish. And there's 2 types of identity. What am I to society? What do I want to be in the world? So my societal identity was to be a banker, like numbers guy, money, and that. My cosmic identity is to be a teacher. Doesn't mean one doesn't make money, the other one will, and that's nothing to do with that. But the point is, there's a 15-year transition from one to the other. And a lot of times, the one big theme across all 3 books is that language is the reason why we can't come to a place as a race. And what I mean by that is, we define things differently, so they mean things differently. Meaning, if I said to you, you're going to be an entrepreneur tomorrow, you may come to me and say, I'm opening a pizza shop of my own, it's going to be fantastic. But that's because you think the word entrepreneurship means self-employment or business ownership, and it doesn't. And because that context of language is basically disconnected from the masses, everyone has their own definition, Everyone believes they're heading in one direction when they're not. And so language, and like my third book is basically called Gate of Choice, the dictionary for the higher human. Because what it does is it says, if you've been following a religion, if you've been following a doctrine, if you've been going in one direction of thinking, let's not give you a new direction. Let's not say, my book is your new religion, you should follow this, this is my way. Well, then how am I any different? Like, you're a Christian, who am I to tell you that's wrong, right? Like, yeah. But here's the argument. What if we can get back to the roots of, if we had a similar definition to what things meant, then we would find a value system of our own, not given to us, but based on a contextual version of how to survive together in a society while we all grow independently, but grow to our highest potential. So the core, this is why I said it's a very complex phenomenon for the majority of people. Yep. But the goal of the entire series is to take you from a state of questioning your environment to reestablishing the guideline, to creating a self-built value system, not given to the normal educational channels in the world, because those channels are built with an ulterior motive to them. Like, schools were created to fund the industrial revolution
and to push the workforce.
Right, exactly. So but that economy has changed, but the school system hasn't, because it became a business of itself. So
it's archaic.
Exactly.
The way we teach kids is archaic.
So teachings are all archaic, to the point where it's like formal education is now completely unnecessary on all grounds. Certification is. But even certification is a scam now, because even people that argue with me, well, you got to go to school to become a doctor. Doctors are taught by pharma companies. So they're not taught to practice medicine and practice how to grow. Instead, what they're taught is how the pharmas want them to treat symptoms. And that's a very different dynamic than saying, you're being encouraged to be a real pioneer in medicine and figure out how to cure cancer. They're saying, we don't need you to cure cancer. We'll do that in due time. What we need you to do is know when someone comes in with cancer, this is how you make the tumor smaller. So it's preventing advancement in a way. It's basically caging people every day. And so I really hate that in the global sphere of where things are going, because that is the real dictatorship, right? The real dictatorship is when you have limiting capacity because someone else will come take away your capacity for innovation. Like if you're in China and you're Jack Ma and you created Alibaba and you disagreed with something, now you don't have Alibaba and you have nothing and you're basically on the side of the road trying to wonder what's going on, and we see that in every single country, right? But people are afraid. This is why we're in an information revolution, and this is how people know they're disrupting us, because they put bad information specifically so you can't tell what's real and fake, because you're spending more time trying to decipher what's a real story than fake. Like the other day I saw Mickey Mouse kicking a toddler, and the first thing I Googled, I was like, did Mickey Mouse really kick a toddler? And it was an AI image. It was really So I thought to myself and I said, why do you need to create a fake image of Mickey Mouse kicking a child? And then I realized I was
shock value.
No, it's not even that. It's because if you confuse people at the simplest levels of the sphere, then they're not going to doubt the confusion even when reality presented to them in a complex problem.
Makes sense.
Like they're just not going to trust anything, right?
Yeah.
So the goal of misinformation
breaking down the trust system and information.
In all.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten to a place where information is so actively available, it's threatening all industries all the time. It's like, this is available. Well, I don't want people to trust that. That's not good. Like, what do you mean the paper is now out on how to cure cancer and AIDS? That's not good. We didn't forefront that.
Yeah.
So if they don't believe it, then they won't do it. They won't go after it. They'll wait till their doctor tells them, So these are really the problem that I'm trying to fix with my books. And it's not because I'm going to fix it by sharing the books with people and be like, read a book, it'll solve your life. What it's doing is helping people understand that the world today is very different than before. And we need a new value system that's not so ingrained in how people in the past have operated. And that's one of the reasons why, as a society here in America, which is still the promised land, much better than anywhere else in the world, even if it has its issues, still better than anywhere else, it still requires what got America here to begin with, which is innovation. It needs ideas, it needs pioneers. And that breed of people has started to die today. And it started to die.
Well, either die or been silenced.
discouraged from being innovative. I think that's discouraged because when they try, they get silenced quickly, and the effort and the wit that it takes to get there is way more. Like the power it takes. Today, anyone can start a business, but today it's 10 times harder to be noticed, right? Like, so before, not anybody could start a business, but it was easier to get noticed because there was only few people playing, right? So the dynamics have changed, and people need to know how to navigate the world today for themselves and their children in a very different manner than they did before, and that's where these 3 books come in.
Where do you see, or how do you see us as a society rebuilding? Because I agree with you. I think that there's been a complete erosion of trust, of our belief system, of our ability, at least within America, to coexist. I think that, one of the scariest things to me is the hyperpolarization of politics. I think that we have all gone on completely divergent paths, and it used to be that you could follow one politician, I follow another, and we could sit here and have a civilized conversation and hug at the end of it and laugh about it.
So to be clear, we have different political views, me and you.
Yeah.
We do. Like, you like someone that I don't like.
Well, to be clear, I don't necessarily like them.
I understand. You like their policy or their direction.
No, I just dislike the opposite
and
choice.
I dislike the opposite.
To be clear, I dislike both options.
I do too. Yeah. But we disagree in who we select for that. And that's okay. It doesn't, like, we can still have these conversations.
Exactly.
We have point of views on why we select who we select and what matters most to us. But let's understand politics from the view of the evolution of politics. Politics have turned into entertainment and views. Politics were losing their appeal. They wanted to bring young people in.
They turned into the Kardashians in the White House.
Exactly. That's exactly what they
did. I think you're probably right. That's one of the things
and they needed a face.
It exacerbated the issue.
And 2016 did that. That was the start of it, because they found an entertaining figure that could bring people out to talk about it. And so when you bring the discussion and the virality to it, you shock people so much. That's true shock value. When you go, there's no way someone said that. That's not what I'm expecting.
Yeah.
So that's going to create that problem to begin with. And then I always say it's hard to go back when you've seen the ratings you get to be like, we're not going to cover this story. It doesn't make sense anymore. Now you're like, wherever the story goes, I go. But I attribute this to 2 key components of media manipulation. The first one is media companies have lost tremendous money since social media, and they needed a way to become relevant.
To get attention back.
Exactly. And the attention basically became politics, more so than TikTok and some of these other places that now have also gone there, right? Like, how do we turn politics into a 30-second clip? So that's really the competition going on there. And the extreme polarization in views is primarily because these different segments and these different people are all stuck in a manner or in a place where they're trying to compete for the same audience or viewership to kind of stay there, the sticky, like, how do I get them to go there? So it's not really the politician's fault, it's the media's fault, first off. The second piece to where as a nation we're going to answer your question in terms of, like, politics have become a show, etc. I've argued this a couple of times, and I hope they prove me wrong. There are certain things that certain political groups will never fix because they won't have something to run on. Republicans,
I agree with you,
will never fix the border because it's the fear. Even though they have the power, they will always act and pretend to be fixing things.
They'll slow it down, but they're not going to stop
it. They will not fix it, though. They will always leave it at a place where
they can't fearmonger about it.
Then they can't say, this was why we won, so we can't take away our own.
Which, by the way, doesn't mean that I think we should have it open in a floodgate.
No, but it's not even about perspective. Let's take away the whole what should or shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
If you run on a promise, if you run on an idea, you run on an idea to say, hey, I'm going to close the border. And you get elected and you get both chambers to do something about it. And you do nothing, right? You go like, we're not looking at that bill yet.
Yeah.
Then you lose the chamber and you go, oh, well, we put this and nobody wants it. This wasn't on the agenda, right? That's one. You can reverse it on the Democrats and say abortion. Multiple times they've had Congress, the Senate. You could have legalized it.
Yeah.
You didn't, right? You didn't do anything about it. So now you have an even bigger agenda to run on it because it's a true impact to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, but you would say that the majority of Americans want abortions and the majority of Americans want closed borders. Like,
I think that's
on
true.
both counts.
I think that's true.
So it is in the benefit of all people if each party did its job when it had the power, but yet neither party does its job even when it's in full power, which tells you that their number one agenda is always to have a reason to stay in power.
Of course.
On either side of the party.
Yeah.
Right? Either. And as long as you have a nation that's forced into that, when do presidents or when do congressmen or senators have the most honest time of their life? The last year before they resign.
Yep.
They will stand for their values, not for their re-election.
And you'll see where they actually stand.
Exactly. So if someone tells you I'm pro-abortion, and on the last vote they're like, nope, then you're like, oh, that's where you really were, because that's what you really wanted to see happen. So they have always done this. So how do we fix it? Term limits, there's hundreds of ways you can fix it. But I think if you shut down lobbying and you put term limits on Congress and the Senate, 2 terms like presidencies, you're always going to have fresh ideas. You're always going to have at least periods of good and bad characters, not generations of it, just periods of it. And as a country, here's the argument about the US. The US is like a giant mall. It's like capitalism. It's the reason the US is Christian-based, like meaning it's the Western influence is Christian in nature, is because Christianity is the only religion that ties into capitalism and does a really good job at that. Every other religion doesn't. It's actually contradictory to capitalism. We are a giant mall where you come here and make a purchase. We have the best product, we have the best things. We don't have as many regulations. You're drinking coffee that'll probably give you cancer in 3 weeks, right? Like, and that coffee is banned in like 7 other countries, right? Like because they like
carcinogens.
Because it's much more expensive to create coffee the correct way, you know, and so on and so forth. But these other countries have better foods, better this, better that, but the opportunities aren't there, right? So that's why they say come to America, you make your money, and you fucking move to Europe and live, you know, the rest of your life happy. The main goal, though, that people don't understand is you can't expect a capitalist country founded on the idea of profit to turn around and say our politicians, however, are not based on profit. They are based on moral codes, values, and judgments. You can't say that.
No.
And the reason I personally fear the opposite side in this particular election that you like is because it is a lifetime of value taking money and not giving back. So the judgment is not that it's bad judgment, because that's what we would all do. If someone offered you $100 million for something, you would consider, your moral code would go down a little bit. You'd be like, well, that's a lot of money. Maybe it's my exit game. Is it illegal? Is it not? You know, it's a lot of money at once, right? Like, we think that way, right?
Sure,
like, listen, but that's the part. There's no shame in saying that's reality. And it's so dangerous, though, to have someone there who does that at a level where they're in the responsibility of all people, and they do this publicly. So this is the problem. The public perception matters a lot. Is there corruption at all levels of politics? Of course. We know these fucking idiots come into Congress with little money, they leave a lot, and we know they want attention, we know that. But the corruption when public becomes a target of foreign nations who go, we can buy them. That's the danger point. Like the point is not to be bought or not, because they're all bought. The danger point is to publicly say I'm for hire and I run the biggest army in the world. So what do you want to see done? That's the risk for me. Like, it's not about like what stance, you know, should we have. Most Americans are in the middle of both parties. You know, most people are in the middle.
And by the way, all I want is a return to centrist politics.
Yes, but it won't happen with these parties, because
neither one of them.
Correct. No. Neither will stay.
They've both gone.
One
to the
side
opposite.
is gone. Well, because they
found a battleground.
Because their base that guarantees their votership is that extreme. Get it? The center.
The guaranteed votes are extreme.
Yes, the center is the one that says, I could go both ways, and maybe I could go for this guy, or maybe
I won't even show up
I'm
and vote.
always Democratic, but this Republican looks like a good option, right? Like, I can guarantee if Nikki Haley was in the ballot, there's a lot of Democrats that come over and be like,
By the way, biggest mistake Trump made was not making Nikki Haley the VP.
But there would have been a lot of people that would have said, I can live with that. You know, like, I can live with that.
I think it was the biggest mistake of his campaign.
But what he did is he went very extreme, and he said, who's like me that's going to obey me? And NBC.
This is where I disagree. I think that if Trump had known for fact that Biden was going to bow out,
he would have done
Nikki Haley.
But
he thought that Biden was going to run, and he had it in the bag. And this is at least my thought. He picked J.D. Vance because in his mind, he thought, who is going to serve my needs for 4 years and then continue the MAGA flag for my policies?
Agreed.
And basically, he looked at it like 4 years of him and then 8 years more of him.
Yeah, I know.
With
Through
JD Vance.
this other person.
I guarantee if you asked him today
So
behind
I agree.
the curtains,
I 100%,
he would have picked Nikki Haley.
No, I 100% agree with that. But this is the argument, again, coming back to exactly what we just talked about. You select people of character, not to stay in power, but to serve what they're supposed to serve. And the argument is on both sides of the coin. We're not serving people in servant policy or servant like jobs.
Well, Tim Walz isn't great either. He spent 20 years in China.
But that's why I said they're both garbage.
Yeah.
Like the argument is that they are selecting people to win.
Yeah.
They're not selecting people to serve.
No.
So it's
that's the biggest issue.
For all parties.
Yeah,
This is not a we disagree who's there and who's the policy leader.
It's become who's marketable in an election.
But now think
base.
a larger case. Take this case for a war example that you're going to war and you're picking your generals, right? On the idea of who will win public opinion, not who will win the war. And that is a very dangerous thing.
In my mind, though, if you look, who in your opinion would rile up troops and stir up enlistment in the military and patriotism more? Trump or Kamala?
Trump.
I think Trump.
But the argument
if you're asking young men in Georgia to lay down their lives...
But the argument is, let's look 10 years ahead. Is it necessary? Because the answer is really simple. We're going into modern warfare where less and less wars are led and ran through people. Like special ops, sure, but like not mass troops like Iraq.
Yeah.
They learned their lessons. They fucking can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So drones, missiles, F-18s, 35s, whatever you can call them, they're out there, right? Doing their thing. Like, we'll just strike this down. It'll take 2 minutes and call it a day, right? Even when they assassinated the Iranian general.
Yeah, it was just a drone.
Yeah, it wasn't like they sent like 3 special ops guys like strangle them and make it like discreet. They're like, just have a good day. Like you're
blew him up from. Exactly. He was probably blown up from a video game controller in Nevada.
So the argument is temper. To me, is a bigger and strategy is a bigger, more interesting component of warfare than it is in massive let's rally people to go destroy a country or do something. Do I believe that what you just said, the Trump policies he has more balls than a Democrat to go out and blow up an enemy and say, get the fuck out of here, like you can't do that? Would they have done different with Ukraine? Would they have had more authority to be like, no, because you can't cross. We'll cross
I don't think Putin would have invaded.
Yeah, there's a lot of arguments like that, right? Like I agree with that. I agree that there is that fear factor.
He's too much of a loose cannon.
But there's also with that, you get the opposite too, which gets less unity from individuals in Europe who now say,
oh yeah, he wouldn't have rallied NATO the same way.
Okay, well here's the argument, right? Like so there is never a one solution is good for all aspects of warfare. The other one is better, But my argument is if you have character and judgment, even if you have your money-making corruption, you can still go in this and say, I've left the right generals in charge, not the ones that are basically telling me what I want to hear, but the ones that are telling me, if we strike, here's the retaliation, here's how it works, not just strike first, ask questions later. And how do we politically get your army chiefs in Europe to do this, and this guy in the Navy in Europe to do this? And I feel like that cooperation is the only way to keep global peace, more than constantly be in strike mode and basically be the police of the world in a way that's like, be afraid of us because we will strike you. So that's an argument in itself. I'm sure there's plenty of guys that'll be like, well, we want strong people that make decisions or like, go do this and not retreat. Afghanistan was a disaster. I would argue Iraq under Bush was a fucking disaster. It's disaster after disaster, right? And so there's a lot of arguments where both sides have made significant war issues and war problems where they could have intervened faster. Ukraine would have probably be done if we intervened faster. But then there's the other political side of things that once people see that, I actually heard this in an Avenger movie, which I thought was really interesting. People said as soon as the Avengers showed up in the movie, they were like, all these guys there, like, why are there so many more people trying to kill us all the time? But in the first, there was one force. Now there's all these galaxies. And the guy said something really interesting. The guy named Vision there, he's like, greatness attracts challenge, right? Like everyone goes, if I knock out the strongest fucking boxer in the country, then I'm automatic. I don't need to fight these other 15 people.
Exactly.
So everyone wants a piece of the big guy because they're like, well, if we knock them down then who's gonna look at what I did to that guy, and that's the biggest guy in the room, right? Like you suddenly become the biggest power. So you have to be careful about how you use your power, because if you're constantly engaged in wars with like 8 different places all the time, and you don't have allies taking their share of the actual action, well, at some point you're going to fall, right?
Yeah.
Like at some point you go like, we don't have the right tech, or we don't have the right people, or something's going on.
So shifting gears away from politics, but to something that I think we started touching on. You're obviously a very proud immigrant. You've touched on your story, that your mom emigrated here and brought you, and you basically built yourself up from nothing. I wanted to hear a little bit about what your experience was during that process, how you got to the country, how you became an American, and how you think it differs from, all of the immigration issues we're having right now. Because, like, for instance, my wife is a proud American citizen now. Took her 8 years. She did everything.
Yeah, it's really cool. I saw that.
Yeah, she did, but she did it by the book. She did it by the right way.
I did it the same way. Yeah, exactly.
And she earned it. She studied. And so she looks at these people, funning over the border, and, she's furious. She says...
So to be fair, she's tried for 8 years. I would say 10 years ago, immigration was different than it is today.
Yeah.
20 years ago was different. So as the further we go back, I would argue it was easier. I know there's more people getting asylum now, but it was easier.
I think it was easier because we didn't have as many enemies.
Exactly, and we didn't have as many people coming in from different places, trying to get in here. So we migrated. I was a refugee in Iran, meaning after we left Iran, went to France because we couldn't come to the States because of the revolution. So we stayed in France for about 10, 11 years. Finally got a green card, not a green card, a visa to come here. We came here and stayed illegally, to be clear. Like we came legally on a visa, but stayed past the visa. We're in a sanctuary city like California. We got a social as a result. And my mom built a small business to show that she's worthy of staying here. So she spend money, try to do commerce. Didn't work out, but at least it got us a social and, the opportunity to apply for a green card. And then years later, even though her restaurant failed and all this money was wasted, she still got us a green card, which was the key, the goal, right, of all this. And then we moved over to Virginia, and at that point we had no money because we had spent all our money trying to get a green card. And in Virginia, I finally get a job and eventually get a green card in full, and I can work. And I become a bank manager very young. And now I start making money at 18, like most adults are making at 30 or 40.
Yeah.
And I started at 14 and basically worked my way up.
I didn't know you spent 10 years in France.
Yeah, 11 years actually, right in Paris, in the outskirts of Paris.
Français?
Mais bien sûr. Très bien
français. Where in France did you guys...
in a place called Bourg-la-Reine, which was in the off-skirt of Paris, like about 30 minutes or so by metro.
It's interesting talking about immigration because you look at France and they've legitimately altered the fabric of their society.
Yeah.
You go to these little French towns... And it's 70% Arabic now.
So this is the problem, going back to the political issue of borders, is that once you bring culture in and you don't train the culture to change, this is why schools are fighting these wars right now, where they go, we want stuff about Christianity on the walls because there are Muslims here that are wearing hijabs. And our kids are confused, like, why is this person wearing this? And why is something about what my kid believes not on the wall? So there's this culture war here that's become a big issue with immigration. That's kind of like the counter-immigration argument, for Democrats versus Republicans. But for me, growing up in that environment, and one thing that was really real is adapting to the culture that you want to get to is the key to making sure your kids are successful. And what that means, to be clear, is really simple. If you have a child and you've been dying to leave maybe Iraq for a chance to be in the US, then here's the argument. Why would you not take a second real quick and help that child adapt to the US environment and instead let them keep their culture from Iraq that you tried so hard to escape?
I agree.
So this is like the big issue with parenting, is that we want change, but we expect the change we seek to adapt to us instead of adapt to it. So this has become a massive problem, I think, amongst...
While we were talking about French immigration, I was going to ask, did you read the story about The Fly? So it happened over the summer. There was a Moroccan gangster that was in prison for some small-time thing. He got nabbed on some like mid-level drug bust that somehow they ended up with this guy in prison. And so while he's waiting to be tried for that, somehow his DNA or something shows up and it's linked to 3 other homicides. And then during this process, they realize that, holy shit, we've got a full mob boss that we accidentally caught. So they're transporting him, and this is in rural France in some random town, or maybe it's outside of Marseille, probably because Marseille's where all the French gangsters are. So they're transporting him. 3 trucks filled with gangsters with machine guns pull up, break him out of jail, and they still haven't caught him. And it was a shock to France because they're like, wait, we don't even have guns and we don't have criminals like this. What's going on? And I think that was a big kind of wake-up moment where, wow, we've actually altered the fabric of our society. Yeah. We didn't have these American-style gangsters. But, you know, for me being a true crime and Scarface lover, I can't help but root for the bad guy. God love the people that lost their lives that didn't deserve to and were innocent. But part of me is like, holy shit, this guy is like the real life Bane. He was sitting in a transport vehicle and got smashed out and is probably hiding in the Moroccan mountains by now. I mean, the fucking fly.
It's just how life works, man.
And like, his nickname's the Fly.
Crime doesn't work on rules, right?
Yeah.
Like government works on rules. You know, rules of engagement versus, you know, warfare, which is not, right? Even our military works that way. Like, we go into a stage and you're like, what are the rules of engagement? The enemy's not like, what are rules of engagement? They see a fucking person, like, shoot him. Yeah. They don't go like, are we allowed to shoot that guy? You know, like, should I take him out? What is the media going to think?
Can I have permission to shoot this guy?
Yeah, to shoot these couple of guys with AKs on the floor. It's like, no, just like light them up.
Yeah. Wow. Well, anyways, I'd say the final thing I would like to ask my viewers, if, you know, the car market, I think you look, prices have kept going down for the last couple months. Do you think that the car market has bottomed? It's going to keep going down? What's your prediction? And do you think people should buy now or wait if you're looking to buy an exotic car?
Buy now before November.
All right.
Because there's always fear before elections. And historically right now, the price index is lower than the historic average of the year, make, and models of specialty cars. So if you're looking for a very rare exotic, now's a good time to buy it because there's more supply and more people are scared, so you could actually snatch, not a good deal, but the right car. And if you're looking for a great deal, like money matters more and you're trying to save money or get the right car, right now there's a lot of inventory and dealers aren't making huge margins and they're not moving volume, so they're willing to take lower on their cars. This wasn't the case 9 months ago. So I would argue that now is a very, very good time as we're near the end of the year because dealers are going to drop cars at like, at a loss for tax reasons, you know, be like just to offset the profits. They're going to drop cars because inventory has shifted what's interesting to people. Like during Bitcoin era, you know, G-Wagons were popular, Ursas were popular, Rolls Royces were popular, now other cars are popular. So like they're going to move their inventory and clean up. And so there are good deals to be had right now. And they are undervalued deals that after November, I predict that by January, February, a lot of these deals are not going to like appreciate suddenly and inflation kicking in, but some of these are going to start triggering back up. Like for example, Ferrari F8s are like 50 to 80K under MSRP, but like cars like that should always be around MSRP. So that adjustment, you know, back to where it should be, will automatically raise you back up where you cover your taxes and some of this stuff and you go, I still drove a free car, you know, for a couple of years. And that's, I think, the real opportunity right now is the negative curve around pricing on a lot of cars.
So one of my favorite segments that Exotic Car Hacks does is those carousels of what to buy now in certain price ranges. Could you give our listeners a couple examples of cars right now that you think are a good buy at, let's say, 150, 200, and 250 up?
R8s, Huracans, always safe bets. Ferrari 458s, always safe bets. Previous generation GT3 RSs, safe bets. Meaning you could basically buy anything and not take a bath. You know, like just basically get out. Old Ghost, old Wraith, you know, like these are bottomed out cars that for years have bottomed out now and they're not going anywhere as long as you don't damage them, rent them.
So the new Ghost is too high still?
Yeah, that's going to get crashed. Like the Cullinans are still crashing. The Ghosts are crashing. Like there's also a whole new segment to market now with modified cars. This was something 10 years ago wasn't as big of a thing. Like people were like super afraid of like wheels and like exhaust. Like
and messing with the car.
Right, but now it's become like the prime driver of like premium money sales. Is people are like, I want something different and everybody's got a Cully. How can I get a wide body Cully? So it's a scarcity thing. It's like there's only 5 for sale. Like, and they control the market. You know, like, so this is what basically there's a shift in what people are buying. And also, historically, Monterey Car Week, all these places, you saw a lot of the generational shift. Like people were buying Countachs 3 to 5 years ago, and the prices were going to the roof. That generation of people is going away now.
Yeah.
And the Diablo market is taking over because that's our car.
Yeah.
You know, like the Murcielago.
That's
then
what
becomes
we
our
grew
car.
up looking
right.
at.
And now we have big boy money and we can buy these things, right? But before, like, that's my dream car. When I had 10 grand in my bank account, I was 400 grand. It was unlikely to happen. Now I buy four of those a month. So like, I'm like, oh, well, I've always wanted the color car on my wall.
Yeah.
But that generation is shifting. And also something that happens through that shift, the new generation is also driving cars. The old generation wasn't, because you were used to the Diablo breaking down. So you're like, I'm just going to leave it here. Or you're used to a Countach, like, I can't drive it too many miles.
Yeah.
But the new generation is like, I want to drive the shit out of my car. I want to do Gumball Rally. I want to do this. So they're taking these old cars and they're adding miles. So this is going to create a shift in what's popular or not in the next 2 years. And it's also going to create a significant boost in pricing for certain cars. And it's going to be more tolerable to have more miles on cars. So while people today might buy a 993...
Well, because the cars are better made.
Yeah, and if they're buying a 993 Turbo, and like, if that old generation was buying it, they would be like, oh, well, I'm only going to drive it like 500 miles a year.
You couldn't have a Countach with 35,000 miles.
Right,
on
but
it.
now you're going to be able to easily buy
get a
Diablos,
Huracan with
Murcielagos
30,000
with those,
still-
and people are easily buying Huracans all day. So it's a very different market, and I think a lot of change is coming.
All right, to close out, I'm going to do 2 at a time and give me your answer, which you prefer. So, Lamborghini or Ferrari?
Lambo, all day.
Audemars or Patek?
Audemars.
Rolex or Audemars?
That's tough. Audemars.
Richard Mille or Patek Philippe?
Richard, all day.
I'm trying to think what else we could do here. McLaren or... I guess, what would you say McLaren would be? What would be McLaren's contemporary?
I mean, McLaren's competing with
kind of
Ferrari,
its-
Lamborghini,
yeah.
but I mean, generally they're very different cars.
It feels like it's in its own kind of vibe.
Yeah, if I chose between, McLaren and Lamborghini, I'd tell you Lamborghini's a better company.
Yeah.
Like, still a significantly better
I
company.
love McLaren's designs,
McLaren product, while flawed, does something very unique that no other marquee does. Like it's a very advanced brand that's almost too advanced for the fabrication capacity for a car that can be used every day. So the quality and the way it's put together may not fit a daily usage, but what it can do and what it does and the way the package goes for the price point is unbeatable.
Yeah.
But I would say Lamborghini still as a company, brand, and what it's done to the entire exotic car market is still a much stronger brand. And I think that's why they're beating Ferrari, they're beating McLaren in the revenue and everything, because they really, like Lamborghini and Porsche, figured one thing out that nobody did. They figured out exactly how to give their audience what they want without giving a shit.
Yeah.
Like basically saying, this is what we're making, and you'll learn
You'll learn
to love it.
what we make, yeah.
And that's the way it should be, because you're not building product for who's going to buy it. You're building product out of your passion
represents
and
your-
and your future of what it should be. And you're saying, jump on board, drive it, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And people are like, yeah, I don't like it, but then they drive and they're like, yeah, this is really what I wanted. And they're stealing from each other.
Yeah.
Porsche and Lamborghini are stealing a lot of stuff together. And I think that has a lot to do with the Volkswagen influence. But generally speaking, I think that's become like the two most solid companies that are building quality product.
Maybach or Ghost?
Rolls Royce all day over. If we're comparing old Rolls versus like new Maybach, then because the same price point, I would say new Maybach. But if we're comparing like new for new, which is twice the price point, I would say that there's no substitute to Rolls.
I love Rolls Royce.
There's no substitute.
It's my
to Rolls.
favorite car.
Even though the Maybach has a lot of business and excitement in the back seat and everything, because I have both. I have the Phantom and I have the Maybach. I'll tell you, the Maybach is definitely a better car to be driven in.
It's so comfortable.
It's comfortable. It's got a lot of tech, a lot of fun. Everything works exactly as it's supposed to. It's not as if you hit something, you didn't damage it. Everything's not.
But by the way, what's interesting is Bentley doesn't get mentioned that much anymore, and I think Bentley does the best interiors in the car market.
Bentley is one of the best
the
new
interiors.
products.
Yeah.
And this is why it doesn't get mentioned, because not enough people have adopted new Bentley and tried it.
Yeah.
Because old Bentley was so boring.
Yeah.
New Bentley.
The interior is
just
incredible.
the car. Like
yeah.
the Bentley GT Speed convertible was in 22 when I bought my first one. I thought it was one of the best cars I've ever driven. Especially how I kept telling people, I was like, if I only had one car, and I had to do kind of everything.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have money for like 5 different cars or 10 cars. That was probably a car I would buy and be like, I can drive this every day. It's beautiful. It's fast. It hits all the buckets, you know. And they've done the new stuff is just superb.
Beautiful.
You know? Superb, yeah.
Range Rover or G-Wagon?
G-Wagon.
And I think we're good, man. PJ, thank you for having me. Exotic Car Hacks, Watch Trading Academy, Third Circle Theory. Check it all out, guys. Thank you for joining the Artlife podcast in your studio.
Appreciate you guys coming.
I wish everyone came with their own podcast studios. This was so easy for me.
Yeah, it was easy and it was a lot of fun. So
yes,
thanks for having me.
For sure.
Good,
Thanks,
man.
brother.
Thanks.